Well, folks, it's time for Joe and Mika version 3.0. So yesterday, big announcement on Morning Joe that had a lot of heads spinning because Joe and Mika of Morning Joe, Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski, who are now a married couple, they weren't originally. They're married to other people when they first started the show, and now they're married to one another. In any case, they have decided that it is time for a little kiss and make up with Donald Trump. I think that we need to take a bit of a trip down memory lane with Joe and Mika to understand just how astonishing this is and just how dishonest this is. So if you go all the way back to 2015, 2016, Joe and Mika were largely responsible for Donald Trump receiving the Republican nomination. They had him on the air all the time. They sat with him as primary results came in 2015, 2016. They were so close that Joe Scarborough was legitimately asked by radio host Hugh Hewitt whether he would actually be Donald Trump's VP nominee. This is back in 2015, 2016. Here we go.
All right, I have a high cotton question for you. This is a serious question.
Yeah.
I tell people I really believe if Donald Trump wins the Republican nomination, your phone, Joe Scarborough, is going to ring and he's going to offer you the vice presidential nomination. Will you accept it?
I'll take a weekend at Mar-a-Lago. So
no, but really,
I don't know where you get that from.
If he asks you, because it makes sense to me. It makes sense to me on a lot of different levels.
Why does that make sense to you?
He needs Florida. He needs someone who's media savvy. He needs someone that he gets along with relatively well and understands media. So if he asks, would you say yes?
I mean, first of all, Donald Trump has, I think we all know, has about as much media savvy as anybody that's been in politics for a long time. You always get me in trouble with questions like this.
Okay, so again, they were very tight at this time. And then after Trump got the nomination, and he didn't keep making time with Joe and Mika, and they decided that instead they were going to favor Hillary Clinton for political reasons, they became quite vicious about President Trump. And they were vicious for legitimately years about President Trump. Here is just some of what they had to say about President Trump over the course of the next 8 years or so.
Donald Trump keeps talking about how America sucks. And before he got elected, America sucked. And then he got elected, suddenly America was great. Then he lost, and now America sucks again. You're voting for a guy like that? What exactly is a threat? What rises to the threat of democracy that we have ever seen in America since the Civil War, if what Donald Trump has done over the past 4 years does not?
Double and triple checking and shilling for him and suggesting that somehow they're being biased, bending over backwards, treating him like a normal candidate. He's not a normal candidate.
Trump is literally crazy on stage, and I say it not in a good way. Not well, not fit, not mentally capable.
When you talk to the people who served with him, they will tell you now the guy was completely ignorant on policy. It was frightening. It was scary. It was depressing.
Well, it's going to be very hard for the former president to convince anybody except for diehard MAGA who don't, the types of people who will follow him to anywhere. It's going to be very hard for him to convince most Americans that he had a modicum of sense.
We've seen him praise President Xi. We've seen him praising President Putin. Mm-hmm. We've seen him praising Kim Jong-un, talking about love letters. And now we hear about this praise for Hitler.
But this is what voters know right now, that he is killing us. I'm talking about us women. He's killing us. He is putting us at risk. He is making us afraid to have babies. He is putting our reproductive health at risk, and some women have died already because of this. Grocery, the stomach is speaking. Elon's rocket ships, cylinders, circles, beautiful circles. What the hell?
Alrighty, so they just go on and on and on. Okay, it's been 8 years of Donald Trump as Orange Hitler. 8 years of it. And so after, again, they helped promote him into the presidency. They really did. Go back and watch the footage from 2015, 2016, when they were having him on routinely. And then they spent 8 long years talking about how he was the threat to the republic. They were standing in the breach. Well, now it turns out that after Donald Trump won, they want to be friends again. So just a couple of days ago, Morning Joe's team apparently went to Mar-a-Lago. And yesterday, they opened by recounting their visit to Mar-a-Lago to make kissy face nice with President Donald Trump.
Joe and I went to Mar-a-Lago to meet personally with President-elect Trump. It was the first time we have seen him in 7 years.
Now, we talked about a lot of issues, including abortion, mass deportation, threats of political retribution against political opponents, and media outlets. We talked about that a good bit. And it's going to come as no surprise to anybody who watches this show, has watched it over the past year or over the past decade, that we didn't see eye to eye on a lot of issues, and we told him so.
What we did agree on was to restart communications. My father often spoke with world leaders with whom he and the United States profoundly disagreed. That's a task shared by reporters and commentators alike.
Okay, so they are walking this thing back. And then, of course, they have to maintain that they are just doing this for the sake of their journalistic objectivity. Here is Joe Scarborough saying, listen, just because we're talking with Trump, that doesn't mean that we're going to start, paying homage to him again like we did in 2015, 2016. We're still going to have our journalistic skepticism.
Well, and of course, you look at the results of the election, too. A new approach, I think, is needed where, again, we speak truth to power. We push back hard like we push back hard, whether it was with Barack Obama, whether it was with George W. Bush, whether it was obviously with Donald Trump or Joe Biden.
You didn't push back hard with Joe Biden. You just called Donald Trump Hitler for 8 years. So what does this say about the legacy media? Well, it says a few things. One, they are such unbelievable garbage liars. They are such liars. How do you go on bended knee to Hitler? In the same way that it was ridiculous when Joe Biden was in the Oval Office with Donald Trump grinning ear to ear after suggesting not only that Trump was Hitler, but that his supporters were Hitler supporters. And it showed that he was lying that entire time, that actually that was just an act of demonization, of demagoguery. It's the same thing when it comes to Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski and so much of the legacy media who have suddenly switched and realized, hey, wait a second, maybe Donald Trump is just a politician with whom we very frequently disagree. Maybe he isn't exactly Hitler. And maybe our overwrought descriptions of Donald Trump were totally unjustified and actually helped spur him back into the presidency. The only person whose credibility was destroyed in this entire process were the people of the legacy media. Maybe that is the lesson in all of this. You wonder why trust in legacy media has completely cratered. It's because of that. Now, that doesn't mean they're doing the wrong thing by trying to reopen channels with Donald Trump. President Trump himself was somewhat appreciative. He did an interview with Fox's Brooke Sigmund, where he said, I received a call from Joe Scarborough requesting a meeting for him and Mika. I agreed it would be a good thing if such a meeting took place. We met at Mar-a-Lago on Friday morning at 8. Many things were discussed. I very much appreciated the fact they wanted to have open communication. In many ways, it's too bad it wasn't done long ago. And then he added, quote, in order to make America great again, it is very important, if not vital, to have a free, fair, and open media or press. And then he said that the MSNBC host, quote, congratulated me on running a great and flawless campaign, one for the history books, which I really believe it was, but it was also a campaign where I worked long and hard, perhaps longer and harder than any presidential candidate in history. And it is impossible for him to get through sentences without superlatives. One of his more charming aspects is, we've talked about various cabinet members, both announced and to be announced as expected. They like some very much, but not all. The meeting ended in a very positive manner. We agreed to speak in the future. Okay, but it's the blowback that is also hilarious about this. So the members of The View who are all in on the Trump is Hitler narrative, they cannot believe this. They cannot believe this. And it does show you the gap, even in the media infrastructure, between the true media elite and the proletariat. So The View are not the true media elite. The View are low IQ, id-driven, babbling idiots. And what that means is that they buy every single piece of propaganda that is put out by the elite level of the elite media. Right? Joe and Mika are supposedly the intellectuals of the elite media. There's an intellectual class like Thomas Friedman at the New York Times. It's people like David Ignatius at the Washington Post. Right? All those people are in the elite class. They're the opinion makers. And then you have the opinion ingesters and excretors. And those are the people on The View. And they simply cannot believe that they have been fooled by the legacy. They've been just as fooled by the legacy media as so many people on the left have been fooled. So here were members of The View going nuts over the very idea of Mika and Joe meeting with Donald Trump.
I think there's a lot of people who are probably looking at what Joe and Mika did and find it opportunistic. There are people who change their stripes, or maybe their spots, I should say today, depending on who is in power and what benefits them. I don't know that that's what they are doing. Mm-hmm. And to me, it's a to be determined situation, because right now it's the transition. Mm-hmm. We don't know what he's going to do as president. We don't know what they're going to do if he commits abuses of power as president. So everybody has to live with their decision. Everybody has to look at themselves in the mirror. I'm good.
Well, folks on the left, they cannot deal with Mika and Joe visiting Donald Trump, but the radical left can't deal with a lot of things. Like, for example, the profound and unshakable bond between the Christian and Jewish communities in America. While the secular left pushes their anti-religious agenda, Christians and Jews have stood together, defending our shared values and religious liberties. That's why I'm proud to partner with the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. For over 40 years, they've been doing something remarkable, building bridges between our communities through faith, shared values, and mutual respect. And the fellowship doesn't just talk, they act. Right now, they're on the ground providing real help to vulnerable Jewish families and elderly around the globe. We're talking about food, medical care, emergency assistance, and security to people who need it most. Look, as somebody who spent years talking about Judeo-Christian values, I can tell you, this organization represents exactly what makes our alliance so powerful. It's all about Christians and Jews coming together to do what our faiths command, helping those in need. If you want to be part of this incredible mission, visit benforthefellowship.org. That's benforthefellowship.org. Your support makes a real difference in people's lives. God bless and thank you. Honestly, there are a lot of people suffering in Israel right now, particularly up north and also in the Gaza envelope. They're being helped out by the fellowship. You can help them. benforthefellowship.org. That's benforthefellowship.org. Also, let's talk about something that actually works. Efficient business finance management. Want to know how to run your company's finances smoother than a well-oiled machine? Check out Ramp. Ramp is a corporate card and spend management software designed to help you save time and put money back in your pocket. Ramp gives your finance team unprecedented control over company spending. You can issue cards to every employee with actual limits and restrictions, a novel concept in today's world of runaway expenses. Ramp's accounting software automatically collects receipts and categorizes your expenses in real time. No more chasing down receipts. Your employees won't waste hours on expense reports, allowing you to close your books 8 times faster. Unlike most so-called money-saving solutions, Ramp actually puts cash back in your pocket. Businesses using Ramp save an average of 5% in their first year. Plus, it's easier to set up than my son's Lego sets. You can get started, issue virtual and physical cards, and start making payments in less than 15 minutes, whether you have 5 employees or 5,000. And now, get $250 when you join Ramp. Just go to ramp.com/Shapiro. That's ramp.com/Shapiro. ramp.com/Shapiro. Cards issued by Sutton Bank, member FDIC. Terms and conditions do apply. That's ramp.com/Shapiro. Now, in reality, Joe and Mika always should have been meeting with Trump, and they should have continued meeting with Trump. They never should have blown him up to gargantuan proportions in 2015, 2016, because that was a betrayal of their supposed objectivity. And then, after he ended up winning the nomination, they never should have swiveled on him with the fiery fury of 1,000 burning suns. They never should have done any of that. They should have simply covered him in an accurate way, even with their viewpoint. But they were totally incapable of doing that. And so you've seen this almost bizarrely uncalibrated swivel from so many members of the legacy media. And it's taking, again, members of the proletariat media by surprise. And they can't switch. They can't move with it. Sunny Hostin on The View. She can't get over the racism and misogyny argument. This is the big problem for the Democratic Party. It's a real problem because the elite in the Democratic Party are already realizing the giant mistake they made with Donald Trump, and they are attempting to swivel away from that. But the proletariat in the Democratic Party, they're like, hold up a second. Hold on. You told us for years this was Hitler. Now you're telling us that he's not Hitler? So were you lying to us? What are we supposed to make of him now? But here's Sunny Hostin again, one of the members of the low IQ Democratic Party, talking about how Donald Trump only won because of racism and misogyny.
I know that as a country, it's very difficult for people to believe that racism and misogyny, they're just alive and well. I think that we don't want to think that about ourselves, our neighbors, our friends. But it's my lived experience tells me that it does still exist, even if your lived experience doesn't tell you that it exists. And, you know, the facts support that. I think we have a graph. If you look at there's a clear racial divide in who voted for Trump as opposed to who voted for Kamala Harris. It's very clear. It's not only clear by race, but it's also clear by education. And so the notion somehow that is not true. This is by education. Those who attended college voted for her at a higher degree than those that didn't.
But I've said that. His point.
Let me just finish. And so I've said that before, and there was so much backlash because I think it's an uncomfortable, inconvenient truth about this country.
And I love the idea that she is a victim of racism in the United States. She received a Bachelor of Arts in English and Rhetoric from Binghamton University, a JD from Notre Dame Law School. She was a law clerk on the Maryland Court of Appeals and was an attorney with the DOJ. And then she became, believe it or not, a regular Fox News guest on the O'Reilly Factor and with Megyn Kelly. And then she ended up at CNN. This is a person who clearly has experienced tremendous racism, and she knows better than anybody exactly what Kamala Harris has experienced. The problem is the Democratic Party has pitched that line so often that now they are stuck with it, and they are bleeding support because of it. As the New York Times points out, Democrats hope to lose by less in blue-collar areas that had drifted toward Donald Trump. In many places, they may have lost by more. The New York Times asks, is this the end of the white working-class Democrat? Quote, 8 years after fury among white working-class voters propelled Donald Trump to victory, Democrats swore this time they would try to do better with that group. Instead, the party's staggering challenges with blue-collar voters have only worsened. Widespread frustration with high prices, alienation from Democrats have turned the party's lawmakers in Trump territory into an ever more endangered species. The new inroads Trump made this year with working-class voters of color, particularly Latino ones, have alarmed Democrats. At the same time, the party's Trump-era Achilles heel, its struggle to earn the trust of white working-class voters, was even starker this year, especially in the industrial Midwest, where the blue wall states of Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin all broke for Mr. Trump. And in many of those states' blue-collar counties, Harris lost by greater margins than Biden did in 2020. Okay, the legacy media led the Democratic Party into a box canyon, and now they are stuck there, and they're going to have a very, very difficult time getting out. Well, speaking of people having a difficult time at getting out, Joe Biden has now said goodbye to the international community. He went to the G20 summit in South America. He looks awful. I mean, just truly awful. It's a 6-day trip that, according to the Wall Street Journal, has featured wistful reminiscences and attempts to highlight accomplishments White House officials fear are in danger of being forgotten or erased. Well, I mean, I think what people are recognizing, of course, is that he had an absolutely terrible 4 years, a truly bad 4 years. And partially, that's because, of course, he is senile. Right here he was babbling about languages in the Amazon forest. Oh, goodness.
Thank you. Thank you. It's heard a lot about you.
Oh, Joe.
You speak more languages than I've heard.
You're a foreigner. You speak so many different languages. I don't know. Oh. And then he says, it's no secret I'm leaving office in January. Yes, we know, and it's great. Again, this is him the other day in the Amazon rainforest right before he was eaten by a dinosaur.
It's no secret that I'm leaving office in January. I will leave my successor and my country in a strong foundation to build on if they choose to do so. It's true, some may seek to deny or delay the clean energy revolution that's underway in America. But nobody can reverse it. Nobody.
Dun, 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 dun. Okay, anyway, there he is, about to be eaten by a dinosaur in the rainforest, but not before Xi Jinping lectures him. According to Breitbart, Xi Jinping sternly warned outgoing American President Joe Biden during what is expected to be their final in-person meeting of Biden's tenure that, quote, democracy and human rights are a red line for communist China. Xi identified human rights as a red line alongside the Taiwan question, meaning supporting China's false claims over the sovereign nation, China's path and system, meaning communism, and China's development, meaning supporting China's status as the world's worst polluter while it tries to economically outcompete the West. Biden reportedly replied, according to China's Global Times propaganda newspaper, America, quote, does not seek a new Cold War, does not seek to change China's system, does not support Taiwanese independence, has no intention to have a conflict with China, and does not see its Taiwan policy as a way to compete with China. Well, most of those things are simply not true. But again, Xi thought that he had his man in Joe Biden. I mean, why would he think that, considering that Xi and his regime had actually paid Hunter Biden money through various cutouts? But in any case, that guy is gone, and the world is changing because of it. Again, so much of what is happening right now in Trump land is such a backlash to Biden. It's amazing. All Joe Biden had to do was be normal, and he couldn't do it. He just couldn't do it because the Democratic Party has not been normal for quite a while. They've not been normal on issues of race. They've not been normal on issues of sex. They've not been normal on issues of economics, and they've not been normal on issues of the border, where now President Trump is about to use massive executive power in order to crack down on illegal immigration. According to Axios, President-elect Trump confirmed on Monday he's planning to declare a national emergency and use the U.S. military to carry out mass deportations. Apparently, Tom Fitton, president of Judicial Watch, posted on Truth Social earlier this month that Trump was, quote, prepared to declare a national emergency and will use military assets to reverse the Biden invasion through a mass deportation program. Trump then reposted Fitton's comment on Monday on Truth Social with the caption, true. So again, Not a giant shock there, considering that he's already tapped Tom Homan, the bulldog, who is the former acting head of ICE, to serve as his border czar. And of course, he has Kristi Noem, who is about to crack down on illegal immigration as well for Department of Homeland Security. Apparently, the president-elect's team is aiming to craft executive orders that can withstand legal challenges to avoid a similar defeat that befell Trump's Muslim ban in his first term, according to Politico. Their plans also include ending the parole program for undocumented immigrants from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, per Politico. And before there's a lot of hue and outcry about the use of a national emergency declaration in order to achieve executive power on all this, Congress could theoretically seize back its power by changing the National Emergencies Act from 1976. But the reality is the National Emergencies Act, which gives the president the ability to declare a national emergency under a wide variety of circumstances, has been used repeatedly, often, constantly, actually, by a wide variety of presidents up to and including Joe Biden, who used it most recently, for example, in February of 2024 to crack down, supposedly, on West Bank settler violence, right in the middle of the war against Hamas and against Hezbollah. It was Joe Biden who used a national emergency declaration to crack down on people giving money, as we'll talk about a little bit later in the show, to people who are actually just building homes in Judea and Samaria. Right? That was a national emergency, according to Joe Biden. So, suffice it to say, that's not actually a national emergency. You know what actually is kind of a national emergency? A giant, wide open border that has allowed in 10 million illegal immigrants over the course of the last 4 years. That is more of a national emergency. And again, Democrats are trapped here because they've spent so long on this idea that it is absolutely bigoted to point out the open border that they're kind of stuck. I'm not sure where they go from here. So, for example, here is Democratic Representative Garcia, who won't answer if criminal illegal immigrants ought to even be deported.
It's going to cost a lot of money. Estimates say $88 billion to just process and deport 1 million people. Do the math. How is he going to pay for it?
What do you want to happen then to the millions of people that are here? Do you support people who are here illegally that have committed crimes in the past few years? Do you support them being deported?
I support treating all of God's children with dignity and respect.
Okay, that is not an answer. And treating God's children with dignity and respect, it seems to me if you want to treat American citizens with dignity and respect, you ought to deport criminal illegal immigrants. That's Representative Sylvia Garcia, who represents Texas's 29th congressional district. There's some fundamental truths that Democrats are denying at this point, but one of them is that universities have become a trash heap. Not so for Grand Canyon University, a private Christian university in beautiful Phoenix, Arizona. They believe that we're endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. GCU believes in equal opportunity and that the American dream starts with purpose. GCU equips you to serve others in ways that promote human flourishing and create a ripple effect of transformation for generations to come. By honoring your career calling, you impact your family, your friends, and your community. Change the world for good by putting others before yourself to glorify God. Whether your pursuit involves a bachelor's, master's, or doctoral degree, GCU's online, on-campus, and hybrid learning environments are designed to help you achieve your unique academic, personal, and professional goals. With 350 academic programs as of June 2024, GCU meets you where you are and provides a path to help you fulfill your dreams. The pursuit to serve others, that's yours. Let it flourish. Find your purpose at Grand Canyon University. Private, Christian, affordable. Visit gcu.edu. By the way, I've been to their campus. It really is amazing. You should go check them out right now. And this is a college that is worth your money. gcu.edu. That's gcu.edu. Also, let's talk about something that affects all of us responsible, hardworking Americans, taxes. That October 15th deadline has now passed. Are you prepared for what's coming next? Do you owe back taxes? Are your tax returns still on file? Did you miss the deadline to file for an extension? Well, now that the October 15th deadline is behind us, the IRS may be ramping up enforcement, and they don't play around. You could be facing wage garnishments, frozen bank accounts, even property seizures if you haven't taken action yet. Here's the good news. There's still hope. Tax Network USA has been in the game for years. They know exactly how to navigate the complex world of tax law. They've helped taxpayers save over $1 billion in tax debt. They've filed over 10,000 tax returns. That's billion with a B, folks. They specialize in helping hardworking Americans like you reduce their tax burden. So don't let the IRS catch you off guard. Get ahead of this right now with Tax Network USA. Their team of professionals will work tirelessly to protect your assets and find the best solution for your unique situation. So here's what you need to do. For a complimentary consultation, call today 1-800-958-1000 or visit their website at tnusa.com/Shapiro. That's 1-800-958-1000 or visit tnusa.com/Shapiro today. Do not let the IRS take advantage of you. Get the help you need with Tax Network USA. She's not alone, by the way. Boston Mayor Michelle Wu, who is absolutely awful. She says that Democrats are going to work to avoid complying with deportation notices in the city of Boston.
What will Boston's response be if these mass deportations take place?
Yeah, look, elections have consequences, and the federal government is responsible for a certain set of actions, and cities, no individual city can reverse or override some parts of that. But what we can do is make sure that we are doing our part to protect our residents in every possible way, that we are not cooperating with those efforts that actually threaten the safety of everyone by causing widespread fear and having large-scale economic impact.
Michelle Wu, awful mayor. And just another reason why, if there are illegal immigrants in the state of Texas or in the state of Florida or in the state of Arizona, they should immediately be given bus tickets to Boston, where they can be safe with Mayor Michelle Wu. Now, again, this is one of the approaches Democrats across the country are taking to Donald Trump. They have to choose between conciliation and pragmatism and the resistance. But the problem is they've been in resistance mode for full on a decade at this point, which is why the Washington Post reports today that California is going to lead a Trump resistance again. Well, I noticed that the last time they led a Trump resistance, literally hundreds of thousands of people fled the state because it was so badly run. I know, because I was one of them and I took my family and my company with me. But according to the Washington Post, within hours of Donald Trump's victory this month, California's top elected officials readied themselves to reprise familiar roles as leaders of the Democratic resistance. Governor Gavin Newsom called a special session of the state legislature to discuss the best ways of Trump-proofing California and traveled to Washington to ask for President Joe Biden's help. Attorney General Rob Bonta held a news conference in front of the Golden Gate Bridge to declare, quote, "If Trump attacks your rights, I will be there." And Democratic lawmakers at every level of government here issued statements assuring residents they'll fight hard against any federal incursions. By the way, that obviously includes immigration. According to the LA Times, immigration is an area of likely conflict, as Trump's promised mass deportation could wreak havoc in California, home to an estimated 1.8 million unauthorized immigrants. Many Californians live in mixed status families. The state's agricultural industry relies on a largely undocumented workforce. So, we'll see if that works out well for Democrats. Again, it turns out that actually Trump's immigration program is one of the most popular parts of his agenda. That is also part of a broader anti-immigration sentiment that is growing across the world, particularly in the West. The major problem of human migration that has plagued the West for years at this point, the attempt to wash over national borders, is having tremendous consequences across the world. The entire article in the New York Times today, quote, "On migration, Europe warms to ideas once seen as fringe." Europe has been struggling for years to limit the number of unauthorized migrants entering by land and sea, instituting increasingly tough policies. Those moves now appear to be working, with the number of migrants crossing into the EU decreasing dramatically from highs last year. As in the United States, the steep drop in border crossings has done little to diminish the political potency of the issue. In Italy, Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni is trying to send migrants rescued in the Mediterranean to Albania. Germany has extended patrols to all of its land borders. Poland plans to introduce legislation to temporarily suspend the right of new arrivals to ask for asylum. None of this is a giant shock, considering, again, that a huge percentage of people who are coming across Europe's borders have very little in common with Western European values. These are major issues. And I think one of the things that we are seeing globally is that the left-wing agenda, which sounds sometimes nice, it sounds empathetic in theory, the actual material consequences of those theories are quite ugly. And when they materialize, people do not like them on a very real level. That's true whether you're talking about defund the police sorts of policies in America's major cities, which are turning increasingly red, or whether you're talking about the idea that vast migration over national borders is somehow an act of empathy that betters everyone's life, which is certainly not true in Europe, where you now have huge percentages of Muslim migrants and a huge problem with Muslim migrants involved in crime, involved in welfare policies, and involved in rioting or even pogroms in places like Amsterdam. It turns out that international leftism is a really bad program for governing. And that's how you get Trump. Now, speaking of President Trump, there's been a lot of debate in the last couple of days over Ukraine policy and what ought to happen now. So, of course, Joe Biden has now greenlit the ability of Ukraine to strike across the Russian border at supply lines. That's something that he should have greenlit a long time ago if he actually wished to reach a solution. Joe Biden pursued, bizarrely enough, the exact same strategy that LBJ and his generals pursued during the Vietnam War, a strategy of graduated escalation. The idea that if you slow walk aid in, and that if you gradually increase pressure, that's going to bring somebody to the table, as opposed to the real way you get to a peace deal, which is overwhelming force, even in short bursts, in order to get to a deal. Well, now Biden is accelerating all of that. And there are a lot of people out there who are fearful that this is going to lead to some sort of nuclear conflagration with the Russians. That seems extraordinarily unlikely. Russia's been threatening this since the very beginning of the war. You're seeing a lot of alarmist coverage, I think, of this particular issue. The reality, of course, is that everyone knows that Trump is coming, and they know that Trump wants an off-ramp. And so the idea that Ukraine is going to seize the upper hand in preparation for a negotiation is actually not horrific policy. Apparently, U.S. Deputy National Security Advisor John Feiner responded from the Group of 20 summit in Brazil to a statement from Dmitry Peskov, who suggested that NATO has gone to war with Russia and Moscow will proceed accordingly. Feiner said the fire was lit by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. He said, I think this notion of fuel on the fire is frankly a side issue to the main issue, which is Russia waging a war of aggression across the sovereign border into Ukraine and continuing to do so. Now, again, all of this is in preparation for Donald Trump entering and then presumably moving toward a solution to the problem. In fact, even Vladimir Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, he has suggested that the Ukraine war will actually end faster under Donald Trump. He says that with the policy of the team that wins, the war will end faster. This is their approach, their promise to their country, and for them, it is also very important. So again, that is Zelensky acknowledging the obvious. Now, Democrats are suggesting that President Trump is going to let Vladimir Putin win the war. That, of course, is not true. Democratic Senator Chris Murphy, he suggests that maybe Trump wants Russia to win the war. This is just nonsense.
My worry is that Donald Trump was telling the truth when he refused during the debate to say he wants Ukraine to win the war. It may be that Donald Trump wants Russia to win the war, and he is going to essentially hand Ukraine to Putin because he is going to refuse to continue to fund the war. There's no real negotiation if Russia knows Trump is cutting off military support for Ukraine.
Okay, but the reality of the situation is that Trump has never actually articulated the idea that he's going to full-on cut off military support to Ukraine. There are a lot of people in the Republican Party who've suggested that. Trump is not one of them, actually. And in fact, J.D. Vance, who's very much on that sort of side of the aisle, supposedly, he was asked if that means that Russia takes over Ukraine, should the United States cut off military support? And he said no. This has all been a lever in order to get Europe to pay more of the freight with regard to the war in Ukraine. The Wall Street Journal points out the Trump administration must find new levers to move Putin from his intransigence. Among these are threats to increase the economic cost of sustaining the war and to increase the pain Russia and Russians bear for doing so. Trump has alluded to such an approach. As a strategy paper from the Trump-aligned America First Policy Institute noted, a successful policy would require, quote, enabling Ukraine to negotiate from a position of strength and developing a long-term security architecture for Ukraine's defense. Trump's ability to press Putin into accepting a settlement could be undermined by the eager public declarations of many in Trump's inner circle to curtail or seize U.S. spending on Ukraine. But again, it is one thing for the Republicans in the Senate to clamp down on the possibility of Ukraine spending when Joe Biden is slow-walking the aid and has no plan. It's another thing for Republicans in the Senate to greenlight an actual plan determined to get to an endpoint. And the big problem with Joe Biden's strategy in Ukraine is it didn't have a goal and it didn't have a means. That's a pretty bad strategy. Typically, you have to have a goal, and then you have to calibrate the means to achieve that goal. Trump has a goal. He wants a deal that looks like a thing. And then the question is, what means are necessary in order to achieve that goal? That presumably is what Trump is going to pursue once he actually enters office. Well, meanwhile, again, Democrats are really struggling. We'll more on that in a moment. First, the #1 documentary of the decade is now Academy Award submitted. That is correct. Submitted. Of course, we're talking about Am I Racist, Matt's follow-up to the cultural phenomenon, What is a Woman? The most asked question about Am I Racist was, is it real? And the shocking answer is yes. Everything you see in the movie is indeed real. Lucky for us, Matt Walsh included exclusive bonus footage where he breaks down exactly how he pulled it all off. The only place to watch Am I Racist and all the exclusive bonus content is over at Daily Wire Plus. Stream it right now. As we've been saying, Democrats are struggling to put all the pieces back together. It turns out that not only did they blow it on inflation, they're now insulting Americans for being concerned about the effects of that inflation. So they're searching for a new leader inside the Democratic Party, and they're having a lot of trouble. Polls suggest that today, if the Democrats were to hold a primary for president in 2028, Kamala Harris would still win with 41% of the vote. Now, let's be real. She was a candidate until 5 seconds ago. But the other members of the sort of candidate pool are no better. One of the people who's been mentioned is Ruben Gallego. He's the new senator from Arizona, specifically because Republicans keep running Kari Lake over and over and over again. Stop running Kari Lake, guys. Like, seriously, Kari Lake might be somebody who you love as a primary voter. After you lose 2 separate major races in a state to the wet dish rag known as Katie Hobbs for governor, and then to Ruben Gallego, a far-left, insane Democrat for Senate, in a state that Donald Trump won by 5, it might be time to find a new candidate. But, unfortunately, it is true that Republicans have blown races before that have national implications. I'm old enough to remember when Jack Ryan blew a Senate race against Barack Obama. He had to step out of that race over some sort of bizarre sex scandal involving his wife. And then Barack Obama became a senator from Illinois and then president of the United States. Ruben Gallego sort of wants to luck into the presidency as well. The problem for Ruben Gallego is that the Democrats, they just can't stop insulting the American people. They think the reason that they lost is because the American people are selfish and bad. Here's Ruben Gallego explaining that the reason that democratic values were sort of put to the side is because Americans are selfish.
The biggest lesson we have to learn here is when people are hurting economically, they're going to take care of themselves first. And that's what we've seen for the last, change elections for the last, 20 years. And I think it's important for Democrats to remember from now on, you have to take care of people at the bottom line. You have to give them some level of economic security.
Okay, so he thinks the reason that Democrats lost on many of the big issues of the day is not because Democrats have taken a scornful attitude toward the traditional morality of most Americans, that Democrats have crossed swords with Americans on issues ranging from our boys, girls, to whether churches are indeed good or should be forced to participate in abortion care. Right? He thinks the reason is because when the economy is bad, people think of themselves first. You might call them bitter clingers. Democrats can't get out of this habit. They cannot get out of this habit of just insulting half of America, which is why presumably you still have a wide variety of Democratic commenters saying to Democrats that they cannot dump the trans issue. Now, again, the trans issue is sort of the number one with a bullet reason why Democrats lost, not because it's the biggest issue in the country, but because it is the most indicative of the disconnect that Democrats have with the normal American. Okay, this was the normie election. This was everybody who considers themselves a normie fighting back against the idea that there is no normal in the United States, that basically all of moral life is a matter of apathy. And yet Democrats can't let go of that. So here's Melissa Murphy on MSNBC explaining that Democrats should continue to promote the idea that men can be women and women can be men, which is, again, the number one idea. By polling data, it was like the number one idea dividing Democrats on morality from Republicans. And even on issues like same-sex marriage, those bridges have been crossed a long time ago. When it comes to the baseline idea that men and women are the same, malleable and changeable from one into another, even many Democrats are like, that's not true. But Democrats cannot let go of this thing because to Democrats, this is the core of their entire being. Truthfully, this is the question isn't why this is a major issue for Republicans. You should be able to understand why it's a major issue for Republicans to go along with the idea that boys can be girls and girls boys. There's no more fundamental area of life than the idea of sexual dichotomy. The question is, why don't Democrats let go of this? And the answer is that they are so ensconced in the idea that all forms of disparity are a form of discrimination, and that individuality lies in your feeling about yourself. They cannot let go of it. To let go of it would be to let go of something far deeper and more important to Democrats, which is the very idea that normality is an imposition. Democrats believe, at least progressive Democrats, that normality, that the basic roles of daily life, these things are an imposition on your freedom. And transgenderism is the ultimate rejection of those norms and those roles, which is why they can't let it go. Here's Melissa Murray trying to make the case.
None of this is new from Republicans, but unfortunately, some Democrats seem to be taking the bait and internalizing the GOP talking point that defending trans rights cost them the election. Days after Trump's victory, Democratic Congressman Tom Suozzi of New York told the New York Times, quote, "I don't want to discriminate against anybody, but I don't think biological boys should be playing in women's sports. Democrats aren't saying that, and they should be," end quote.
Okay, why exactly is that controversial? The answer is it is not controversial, actually. By new polling data, 3/4 of voters say it should be illegal to subject children to transgender medical interventions, according to a new poll from Neapolitan News Service. The majority of those in both major political parties say they oppose allowing minors to attempt to, quote unquote, change their gender. That includes 86% of Republicans and 58% of Democrats. But the top elite Democrats, they cannot let go of this. They cannot let go of it. And there's a reason they can't let go of it, because, again, it goes to the core of their vision for the world. And so they'll keep on losing if this is what they believe. And the censorship regime is over. Okay, people are now freely saying what they believe on this issue for the first time in a long time. There's a poll that came out recently that suggested that 41% of Americans now feel more comfortable saying what they actually thought about the things like child transition. The question is, why were they remaining silent in the first place? All of that is over, and Democrats can't let it go. They simply can't let it go, and that's a major problem for them going forward. Well, meanwhile, in Pennsylvania, we have some updates. So as you'll recall, Pennsylvania Democrats were attempting to illegally count votes in Pennsylvania to overturn the election of Dave McCormick, the senator-elect from Pennsylvania, Republican. Now, apparently, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court has decided that they are going to order the boards of elections throughout the state to follow their previous rulings and not count mail-in and absentee ballots that failed to comply with the state election code. This is according to Breitbart. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court issued that ruling on Monday as election board officials in Bucks County in particular have defied Pennsylvania Supreme Court precedent and moved to count ballots that the court has determined cannot be counted. So that at least is a piece of good news. It is insane that the people who were illegally counting ballots were not arrested for the crime of having done so. Governor Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania put out a statement saying, quote, "As I've made clear for years, every eligible Pennsylvanian's vote should be counted in every race. And thanks to the hard work of Republican and Democratic election officials all across the Commonwealth, Pennsylvania has held another free, fair, safe, and secure election." As counties continued counting ballots from the 2024 general election and a mandatory statewide recount begins in the U.S. Senate race, they were confronted with the lack of legal clarity surrounding undated mail-in ballots that caused significant confusion and put counties in a challenging legal position. Given this lack of clarity, county officials in each of our 67 counties were damned if they did and damned if they didn't. That, of course, is a lie. It is not even remotely true. Democrats were just illegally counting ballots, and Josh Shapiro should not lie about that, especially if he considers himself a sort of pragmatic Democratic moderate with hopes for a political future. Don't lie about illegally counting votes if that is your thought. Okay, meanwhile, on the Donald Trump nominee front, Donald Trump has now nominated a new Secretary of Transportation. That, of course, would be Sean Duffy. Sean Duffy is being characterized as a Fox business host. Again, this is the way that people who are interesting nominees are dismissed by the legacy media. If you're Pete Hegseth, we ignore your military service, we ignore your degrees, and instead we say that you were on Fox and Friends Weekend. If you're Sean Duffy, then we ignore the fact that you served in the House of Representatives for 8 years, and instead we just call you a co-host on Fox Business. Trump, in a statement, praised Sean Duffy as, quote, "a tremendous and well-liked public servant," and said he was a respected voice and communicator in the Republican conference during his time in Congress. Duffy served as chairman of the Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations and on the House Committee on Financial Services during his time in Congress. CNN says he has little or no experience in the transportation field. Well, I mean, I'm sure that he has more information on the transportation field than, say, Pete Buttigieg, a mayor of a mid-sized to small city in the Midwest who was and liked trains. That was literally his only qualifier for being Secretary of Transportation under Joe Biden. So Sean Duffy is the latest pick. The most controversial pick remains Matt Gaetz. There's a news story out from ABC News about the Attorney General nominee. A lawyer representing two women who testified before the House Ethics Committee has now told ABC News that former Representative Matt Gaetz paid both of his adult clients for sex. This is Florida Attorney Joel Leppard talking to ABC News' Juju Chang.
Both of your clients testified that they were paid by Representative Gaetz to have sex.
That's correct. The House was very clear about that and went through each. They essentially put the Venmo payments on the screen and asked about them. And my clients repeatedly testified, what was this payment for? Well, that was for sex.
Now, again, his clients are going to have to come forward and actually testify publicly if they wish to be taken seriously on this. Okay, allegations are not tantamount to actual proof at this point. They're not after Brett Kavanaugh, not after the way that we have seen a wide variety of Republican nominees smeared along these lines. So it may be true and it may not be true. We really don't know at this point, considering the Justice Department spent years, according to ABC News, probing those allegations against Gaetz, including allegations of obstruction of justice, before informing Gaetz last year it would not bring charges. Apparently, according to Alex Pfeiffer, who's the Trump transition spokesperson, these are baseless allegations intended to derail the second Trump administration. The Biden Justice Department investigated Gaetz for years and cleared him of wrongdoing. So we'll see how all of this plays out. Obviously, this is one of the issues surrounding Gaetz when it comes to the nomination fight to come. Meanwhile, internationally, the bizarre targeting of Israel continues on a wide variety of fronts. Pope Francis has now called for a genocide investigation in Gaza, which is just an absurdity on every possible level. Francis reportedly, privately, used the term genocide last year to describe Israeli military actions while speaking to a group of Palestinians, according to the Washington Post. And apparently, he has a new book called Hope Never Disappoints, Pilgrims Toward a Better World, that was based on interviews with him. And Francis is quoted in the book as saying, according to some experts, what is happening in Gaza has the characteristics of a genocide. Okay, that is idiocy on the highest possible level. But then again, Pope Francis has expressed a wide variety of views that can only be declared idiocy throughout his tenure as Pope. That does not mean everything that he says is stupid, obviously. Many of the things he says, I think, are quite wise. international relations do not fall into that category. He has said a wide variety of foolish and counterproductive things. But that, again, is because Pope Francis has strong tendencies, shall we say, toward liberation theology, which is essentially Marxist-inflected Catholicism, which is a real problem inside the Catholic Church. Yeah, it is just another indicator of the moral foolishness of people on the left to suggest this sort of thing. Speaking of which, the United States is now hitting, under Joe Biden, an Israeli settler group with sanctions over supposed West Bank violence. Okay, that's not really what's happening here. They're proclaiming it's about West Bank violence in Judea and Samaria. That's really not what this is about. They're now sanctioning a group called Amana. Amana is basically an aid group for people who are building homes in Judea and Samaria who are Jewish. That's what Amana is. And so they're attempting to now label this a, quote, key part of the Israeli extremist settler movement. Now, meanwhile, the Biden administration is flowing something like $230 million into Palestinian coffers in the middle of a war in which the Palestinian Authority has been supportive of Hamas. It's absolutely unbelievable, but it's just too predictable, obviously. According to the Washington Free Beacon, the new sanctions are the broadest to date, imposing unprecedented punitive measures on 3 Israeli organizations the administration accuses of fomenting violence against Palestinians in the West Bank. They were leveled just days after a coalition of nearly 90 congressional Democrats petitioned the Biden administration to ramp up sanctions on Israel before leaving the White House. And this has become sort of de rigueur on the part of Democrats leaving the White House. Remember that Barack Obama, as he was leaving the White House, essentially abstained from an absurd UN Security Council resolution that declared the Temple Mount was actually sovereign Islamic territory. So this is nothing new. As Joe Biden is on his way out, he's going to grant some sort of sop to the wildly anti-Israel progressives. The sanctions were announced just 3 days after the Biden-Harris administration awarded another $230 million in funding for humanitarian projects in the West Bank and the Hamas-controlled Gaza Strip. That is more than $2 billion in taxpayer funds to the Palestinians since Hamas's October 7th terror spree on Israel, which, by the way, is unbelievable considering that everyone distributing that aid is, again, on the side of Hamas or supports terror in other ways, because the Palestinian Authority still has on its books pay-to-slay laws that actually pay people in jail for killing Jews. It's insane. Again, the latest sanctions are targeting this group Amana, which is designed, as we say, to help people actually move into homes in the West Bank. But according to the State Department, they say that Amana, quote, has established dozens of illegal settler outposts and directly engaged in dispossession of private land owned by Palestinians in its support of settlers. What do they mean by dispossession? Do they mean people like illegally grabbing like a home that's already legally owned? Or do they mean that these are disputed territories and both sides claim sovereignty over them, which is actually what's happening in Judea and Samaria? Okay, the reality is that Palestinians have been illegally building in the West Bank for a very long time. All you have to do is take a drive through the West Bank. You can see entire villages that have been illegally built there by Palestinians. They're completely empty, but they've been put there without the windows there so they don't have to pay tax in order to occupy that particular land for supposed future negotiations or simply to change the facts on the ground. This is an ongoing legal dispute, but the Biden administration has taken the position that illegal building by Palestinians in the West Bank is legal and Israeli building in the West Bank is somehow illegal, which is ridiculous on its face, legally speaking. And of course, the idea of leveraging sanctions or levying sanctions against a group like Amana is specifically designed to misuse U.S. sanctions to oppose Jews who tend toward the right. The Foundation for Defense of Democracies wrote in an analysis, quote, usually sanctions target those responsible for severe wrongdoing like terrorist financing, nuclear proliferation, and large-scale human rights abuses. The new sanctions break this mold by targeting Israeli Jews in the West Bank accused of property crimes and vandalism or of simply associating with the wrong people. Of course, the Biden-Harris administration sanctions list, according to the Washington Free Beacon, was built with the support of anti-Israel non-governmental organizations, including the Muslim Brotherhood-tied Dawn Mina, a radical anti-Israel organization, according to Eugene Kontorovich and other analysts from FDD. Not a shock at all. This is what they do. And of course, they're doing this to please their progressive base. Bernie Sanders has an entire piece in the Washington Post today calling for no more arms sales to quote-unquote Netanyahu. Okay, the United States does not make arms sales to Netanyahu. They don't make arms sales to any specific Israeli politician. That's not how arms sales work. Arms sales go to the ally. They go to the state. If we make an arms sale to Ukraine, it's not going to Zelensky personally. That's not how any of this works. But Bernie Sanders is a moral moron, as always he has been. Meanwhile, they're doing this in the middle, by the way, of Hamas legitimately just stealing aid en masse. According to the New York Times, over 100 aid trucks were stolen in Gaza by Hamas, according to the UNRWA, which is basically a Hamas front group. Somehow, of course, the New York Times finds a way to blame this on Israel because that's the way all of this always works. What a pathetic infrastructure the Biden administration and their allies have built in the anti-Israel front. All right, guys, coming up, we'll be getting into the state of play in Berlin. Shocking story out of Berlin. If you're not a member, become a member. Use code Shapiro. Check out for 2 months free on all annual plans. Click that link in the description and join us.